And good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to episode 37 of The Renny Show, where Jenny and I are absolutely thrilled to be in conversation with G Sabini-Roberts. So, hi, G. Hi, Jenny.
Good afternoon, both of you, and to all the listeners and watchers on LinkedIn Live and Facebook Live. We've been waiting a long time to have G in conversation, so it's fabulous that we finally managed to get, or I've managed to get my act together to get this organised. So it's very exciting. You're very welcome, G.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you both for having me.
I thought that there may be people, surprisingly, there may be some people in the world who don't know you. So I'm just going to give you a little introduction. So for people who don't know G, they are an entrepreneur, writer, trainer, speaker, and activist, founder of Branding by G, and co-founder of the Queer Box of Happy Families, and co-author of 2 books on neurodivergent entrepreneurship and an advocate for inclusion. You've been running your own brand design business since 2012, is that right?
Yep.
And you've helped hundreds of businesses to grow show-stopping brands. You've also been running events, training and facilitating spaces in and for the LGBTQ community since 1996, and in academic and business settings since 2004. Always leading, this is my favourite bit, always leading with curiosity and kindness. G brings their unique stories from the margins of gender, neurotype and sexuality to deliver thought-provoking and memorable experiences to all audiences. And so we are so delighted to have you as our guest in conversation today.
Absolutely.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
So, with all that in mind, because obviously you're doing some incredible things in a number of different spaces that help a wide variety of people. If you had to almost not pick one thing necessarily, but pick the main thing, what do you want your legacy to be from the work that you do?
Ooh, okay. See, that's a tricky one because there's an aspect to the concept of legacy which, and this is a personal perspective, not one that I would expect to be shared by anybody else necessarily. There's an ego element in there of what am I leaving behind, so I've left my mark in some way, shape or form. And that's not the kind of legacy that I aspire to.
Okay.
What I'd love to do, I think, if we're bringing that into the conversation of on your deathbed, what do you want to be feeling? I want to feel like I put more out than I took. Yeah. I want my overall balance to be positive in the world. That doesn't necessarily need to have people specifically identifying me as a source for something dramatic or specific, but what I like to be doing consistently every day that I'm here on this planet breathing is putting out more good, supporting whoever I am encountering to find out how they can put more good out, to grow confidence in their sense of what is good and right in the world. And generally these days that's a lot of conversation around privilege and prejudice and equality and diversity and inclusion and all of those juicy things. I don't need it to be attached to me. So my legacy is more the light footprints that I get to leave behind that hopefully leave in my wake more good than bad. Does that make sense?
Makes absolute sense. Yeah, and I'd feel for what makes you so passionate about what you're doing, because it, the way that it comes across, on your socials and the way you talk is really positive. So I'd just love to know what makes you so passionate for that.
Brilliant question, because the passion, I think, stems from that absolute sense of not being able to tolerate injustice in the world. So I'm autistic, and certainly within the autistic community, we often find people on the autistic spectrum have a very strong sense of social justice. And this is, of course, lots of other people do too, but within this aspect of my communities, that it runs through the middle of us, and we literally can't sit still if we are seeing something unjust happening. It's just something that it's not okay. We need to resolve that. So it kind of comes partly from there, I think. It's not okay for anybody to experience anything less than a decent human experience. Human rights are human rights, and if you're not getting them, then that's not okay. So that's the inspiration. Really, probably stems from that sense of justice, or a sense of injustice not being okay. So there's an anger in there, but it's not an anger that is flaring fire hot and let's burn the whole thing down. It's an anger that is used as a source of fuel, because until we live in a world where all people have access to everything that they need, they are not suffering from abuse and neglect and all of the things that we know happen in those lovely spaces of privilege and prejudice. Until we're all okay, then that anger burns, that fuel burns, and we've still got work to do.
Absolutely, yeah. That's
We've got such a lot of work to do, haven't we? Yeah. And I love that you said, G, that that ego in legacy, we often talk about, it's like leaving a prize, what's different, but actually the difference that you have made to people's lives is a lasting, because things will be different every time you, Rachel, any of us do positive things that make a difference to the world, or to one person who is in it, then there's one more person whose life is improved. And actually that's leaving my thoughts about legacies, that I want to leave the world a better place than when I entered it. And that's not from an ego perspective, it's from a more people living in the way that they would like to live, as opposed to feel that they have to live. Which brings me really nicely to my question, which is, you inspire lots of people. Who inspires you?
Ooh, okay. There are probably two answers to this. The first is, I am inspired every day by the people I see out in the world who are doing the work. So it doesn't matter what that work is, whether we're talking about somebody who's running events and running programs within the entrepreneurial space and doing it in a really inclusive way, putting their money where their mouth is, genuinely investing in inclusion and accessibility. Every single person, and in our combined worlds, we know a good few of those humans now, thank goodness. I just love turning up in spaces that have those people in, because we create momentum together, don't we? It becomes a collective movement. Well, one person starts pushing that rock and then others get behind. So all of the people out there who are doing the work, and it doesn't have to be necessarily the people waving the flags or standing at the centre stage. It can be the people who are doing it quietly behind the scenes. In fact, often that work is harder and takes more to do. But it's all of the people who are doing the work. There's a beautiful sense of kinship whenever you witness somebody else who is doing the work of, I see you and I'm here, and it encourages that camaraderie and that collective movement, and like I said, and it becomes momentum building. So that is inspirational, and it's particularly in the last few years, as we see, thankfully, more voices and more people and more concepts and ideas and events and all of the things coming out that are doing this stuff better. Not doing it brilliantly, because we ain't perfected any of it yet, but doing it better and constantly striving for better. That momentum is growing. So every single one of those human beings inspires me, just by being able to stand next to them in a space and witness what they're doing. It's a glorious thing, and it makes me want to do more. So that's one half of the question. The other half is, it's the kids my kids, I have 4 kids, 4 neurodivergent kids who are all very different and very special humans in their own ways, who have to overcome all kinds of challenges to function in the world as well. But all of our young people, if we look at the world that we're in right now, we're creating what we're creating now. We're doing it for them.
Yeah.
But actually we should be learning far more from them than we give them credit for. I'm blessed to have teenagers in my life on a day-to-day basis right now, because they are epic humans, and their grasp on the world and on humanity and on culture is so much more astute than all of us old fuddy-duddies. It's just beautiful. So I have hope when I hang out with our teenagers, because they have more of a clue, and I love it about them, and it's an honour to get to share life with them. They really are inspirational human beings, every single one of them.
It can actually be quite grounding, I think, can't it, to spend time with the younger generations who just have a different outlook. Their life is different for them, I guess, as that we grew up in a different time. They're growing up in a different time. That that will happen ad infinitum throughout the time that the earth is turning. But yeah, I think it could be quite grounding to I'm fortunate enough to have a teenager in my household as well, and it's definitely a wonderful and grounding thing. I think it reminds you the reality, and that there's other perspectives.
It does indeed. We get jaded, don't we? We've had years of what we've had, and that clouds what we can see. We are not looking at the world through clear lenses. They are.
And I think that starts with I've got grandchildren, and so I'm having the additional perspective of 2 and 4-year-olds, and they bring a completely different perspective, because they're the opposite of jaded. They're fresh, isn't it? And everything's new and exciting and interesting, and watching them work out how to do stuff, and the sheer joy, and that they're so in touch with their emotions, whatever they are. They have no filter in terms yet of expressing how they feel. And just sometimes, as with my youngest, not my youngest anymore, one of my grandsons yesterday, he was just sad, and he sat on the floor, and he just he cried, and we asked him what he needed, and he just needed a hug, and it's that thing. It's like, there's many adults who would dearly wish to be able to do that, isn't there? And just be able to, it's as simple as that. It was wonderful to watch and be able to be part of that. So yes, absolutely.
For life to be so uncomplicated, as it is for a young child. It makes you think, doesn't it, about all the layers of conditioning and all the rest of it that we're all subject to as we grow. And even when you compare that age group, the toddler age group, with the teenage age group, the difference in approach, and it's no longer sort of black and white. The very young ones, I'm sad, so I'm going to cry. It's that simple. But of course, it then just gets more and more complicated the more experiences we gain and the older we get. And it's a fascinating thing, really, isn't it?
It is, and I think it's one of my goals, certainly more recently, has been to try and find ways to get back to that.
Oh yeah.
Actually, if we really assess where we are, it's a process I'm doing in my personal life at the minute, because I'm at maximum overwhelm in a lot of ways, as so many of us are. It's like, what can I take away? What can I extract? Because actually that's how I want to live. The layers of complexity we built in here, surely they're not all necessary, and we can let some of them go. So yeah, I'd love to get more of that back in life too. I think it would do us all a lot of good if we can. Yeah.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Right, so that brings us on to the next question. Obviously, you do a lot of work in creating safe and inclusive spaces. In your experience and in your opinion, what does a safe and inclusive space look like? or feel
Okay.
like, or, you know.
In order to answer this question, I'm going to backtrack a little bit into what we mean by safe and inclusive. And the
Great.
reason why I use that language when I'm working with people who are considering their own spaces and how they manage them is because often when we start having a conversation about let's create inclusive spaces, there then becomes a yes, but what if by doing that we make somebody feel less safe? So that's really why those particular two words have been brought in, because often when people are saying, you think, okay, let's make an inclusive space. And I'm going to go for a very stereotypical example here. So this is a women's space, and they're recognising that all women are women. They need to include trans women in that space in order to be genuinely inclusive of all women. And there is a concern that there may be some cis women potentially in that space who would feel less safe in a space that also included trans women. And that's a conversation that I have a lot. I've worked with a lot of people in those kinds of situations. I'm not picking on a specific example. That's a very common conversation I find myself having. So the work then actually isn't, well, let's do the unpicking. We are not actually trying to figure out why trans women, for some reason, make some cis women feel unsafe, because we need to unpick the reasons behind that and where that comes from. So when I'm talking about those kinds of spaces, it's because I'm recognizing that there is sometimes, for some people, not for me, not for any of the people who get to the end of that process and are able to joyously embrace creating spaces that are safe and inclusive, because it totally can be done. But the people who are on that journey, there can be a sense of conflict sometimes between these two things. That's why I use those words, because those are the conversations that need to happen so that we can then get to a space where we do have a genuinely safe and inclusive space, because we've done things like recognised where we may be using gender as a descriptor for behaviour. So we do not want to allow men in this space because we don't want it to feel like this, rather than we do not want to allow people who behave in a certain way in this space. One of the journeys I see people going on often is an unpicking of my space. So this space started as, to use the same common example, a women's space. It just had cis women in it. Okay, so I'm doing the work. Actually, clearly, trans women are women, and this space is for all women, cis and trans. Therefore, there may be a moment in that person's leadership journey where they have to recognise that there is the potential for, if some people in that space do have transphobic views or attitudes that do not contribute to the overall well-being of all of the humans they want to have in that space, that there is a new role for them in how to manage as a leader when you have people in your space who maybe do not represent the ideals and the philosophy that you want in your space, and how you manage that well. So there's often it's a leadership journey often when we're talking about the kinds of spaces. It's how you handle that, because often it's not possible to say, hey, there's space here for all of the opinions, because at some point there'll be some opinions that are actually not okay, and a line has to be drawn, and each individual has to decide when they're ready to draw that line, how they draw it and how they manage it when it happens. And this is not in every case. Often these conversations happen really easily. It's not hard, but I'm aware of the possibilities for that tension. When we've got beyond that, this is a space for all women, then there can sometimes be a question of, actually, would non-binary people be welcome here? I think non-binary people would be welcome here now I think about it, because when they started that process, what they were thinking is, I'm creating a women's space, often because I have been in a mixed gender space and I didn't like it because I experienced some behaviours from some men in that space that were overbearing or sexist or made me uncomfortable. And so that women's space was set up as let's create a space that doesn't feel like that. But actually, as you start to unpick it, then well, actually no, non-binary people would be welcome. Okay, so but what if we make it assigned female at birth non-binary people, and then it's going to still feel a bit the same, and then you realise you can't do that, because the only way you get to distinguish between non-binary people who are assigned female at birth and assigned male at birth is by looking in their knickers, and you're not going to be doing that at the start of your business networking group, are you? So
well, I don't know.
No, I'd love to know what kind of business they'd get away with that in.
yeah. And then you realize, well, actually, maybe some men would find this space. What about disabled men? What about black men? What about gay men? What about trans men? Actually, if we're trying to create a space that is a nurturing one, and we want it to be a space where all people who are struggling in some way in a heteronormative, cis, straight, white, able-bodied world, then if we're creating space for people who have found aspects of that hard, we've got almost all people. We're just excluding the straight, white, cis man. And then that gets uncomfortable, because you know what? When you think about that, if we're creating a space for everybody apart from that person, firstly, who in the world that we live in holds most of the power?
White men.
It's those people. So we're creating a space to try to change the world, and the only people that we are not inviting into that space are the people with the power. And if that's the case, then creating exclusionary spaces, there's always a need. If a particular group experiences any form of prejudice or oppression, there actually absolutely should be a safe space for that group of people to find each other and support each other. So this isn't saying don't have exclusive spaces at all, but there is a theoretical process, a thinking journey to go through as we go through those stages of what are we doing by creating a certain type of space, if we actually want the result of creating that space to change the world in some way. Quite aside from that, there are some really lovely straight, white, able-bodied, cis men who actually do get it.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to exclude those men from any of these spaces too, because it's not about the gender often, it's about the behaviour. And I think often we've experienced some of those behaviours from people who aren't men, or who aren't straight, or who aren't able-bodied. Being a decent human doesn't have a label, a protected characteristic over it. Decent human and challenging humans come in all of the shapes and sizes and colours and flavours. So it gets fun when we start to pull it all apart. It really does.
Oh yeah, I mean,
fun.
Crikey, it's just incredibly complicated, isn't it? It's clear that there's no single right answer, as with most things. It's all about the nuances, and just love to pull out what you said about behavior. That for me hit the nail on the head. It's about the behaviors that people are displaying, isn't it? And that can come from anywhere, from a majority, from a minority. Anyone can display what we might consider to be horrendous behavior, and that's really, that's just brought home to me how complicated it actually is to make safe and inclusive spaces, and have it done in the right way. And when you said about excluding the decision makers, that's really complicated.
I find it gets simple. I think it's really simple. I think it feels complicated when you're still going through the process of pulling out the threads. But once you've gone through that thinking process of pulling out all of the threads, it is very simple, because it is about behaviour, it's about experience, and it's about cohesive community, kindness, curiosity, all of those words that we started with at the beginning of this recording. That's the key. And if we can stay true to that, we'll figure the rest out. Yes, it can feel complicated, but it's not. The whole point is it gets complicated when you're suddenly trying to balance this person's needs and that person's idea about what is safe and isn't safe. And this person says they wouldn't feel comfortable with a person like that, but there are people like that in this space. And how do we continue to create a safe space? And of course, that gets complicated. because you're trying to meet a whole load of needs where you've got trauma, or you've got beliefs that don't align with your own. Yes, there is complexity there, but if you approach it all from a position of love, kindness, curiosity, often the answer is a lot simpler than you might have thought.
Yeah, I mean, it's team human at the end of the day, isn't it? That's kind of the way that I look at it. Wow. I'm really hoping that that everyone listening has maybe got things they want to contribute to the discussion. So feel free to message us or comment on any of the posts where you see this or hear this, because I think this is a really important stuff that we're talking about. So thank you so much for that, G. That was a brilliant answer.
Now it's your turn. It's your turn to ask us a question.
I'm really glad to have the opportunity to, actually. So, I think in most of us, there is a defining moment when it comes to your own understanding of diversity and inclusion. Often it's a moment when your own privilege gets slapped back in your face in some way. You suddenly become aware of the privilege that you have in a certain situation. And I was wondering if each of you would be willing to share maybe a moment where that's happened to you in some way and how that has changed you.
I mean, yeah, I mean, there's been a couple of things come immediately to mind for me. I'm just trying to think what year it would have been. A number of years ago now. It will have been approximately 2007. And in my workplace, I joined a workplace after many of the other people had already been there a while, and I made friends with a trans woman who was going through transition. And oh goodness me, when I think back, talking to her, I was, we talk about curiosity. I was really curious. I wanted to educate myself about the journey, and I can just remember feeling so appalled about some of the treatment they were receiving from other people. And, I felt ashamed that people, kind of my peers, both in life and in work, were displaying this kind of behavior, which obviously then makes you look a bit internally about, okay, well, has my behavior ever been like that? And I can remember having a stand-up, almost shouting match in the bar with someone quite senior to me, because I just couldn't believe they would openly talk behind that person's back in such a derogatory way. And it made me realize that understanding is everything. Until I educated myself, I didn't understand. I didn't know what that journey involved. And this person I was arguing with clearly had no clue what that journey involved. They had a very I'm right and this is how it is opinion on it. And I think I would also say that when Black Lives Matter, when that movement started, I very much had, I guess, whether I held the mirror up to myself or someone else did, I don't really know. But I realised that I'd been going through life. I'd had many Black friends, but I had never really considered the experiences that they go through, in some cases every day. It's something they live with. The lived experience is so different, and it just really brought home to me the importance of educating yourself and actually putting yourself in someone else's shoes. I mean, let's face it, you can't actually walk in their shoes, but to even try to put yourself in their shoes, I think is key. That's the big takeaway for me.
And
thank you.
Mine, funny that it quite often we have a seamless link, completely accidentally. So mine, as if by magic. So I was born in Africa. I've lived in lots of African countries throughout my life. So I have been in places where I was the minority. And as a child, I think that gave me a very different perspective, which I value hugely. But when I was, it was probably about 2006, I moved to Oxford from Scotland, and I just got divorced. It was a really tricky time, and I met a lady who lived in the flat above me, who is a Zambian woman who had come over from Zambia to do her MBA at Oxford. And I reached out because we were both new people in the block, and I reached out and said, "Do you want to come and have a cup of tea?" And we were chatting. She came straight down. We were chatting, and I asked her if she had been, what she loved most about being in Oxford, and she said, "Oh, well, I haven't been anywhere." And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, I haven't been anywhere because I'm not sure they would serve me." And I said, "Sorry?" And she said, I don't know what you mean." And she said, "Well, I am a black woman on her own, and I'm not sure if I went into cafes for a cup of coffee or somewhere for lunch that I would be served." And my initial reaction was one of horror, and then one of, and I think this is so common, and I want to say it because it made me, I was of disbelief, because I didn't want to think that that was even a possibility. It was like, are you joking?" And she's like, "Absolutely not." And so I caught myself in that privilege, and I said to her, what's made you, what what's made you think that?" And she said, "It has happened to many of my Zambian friends when they came to England, to London, to Oxford. It is incredibly racist." So my initial response, it was a long time ago, so I won't apologise for it. My initial response was to apologise profusely for the whole of the UK's racism, and to say that's terrible. I need to. We need to change that. And of course, I then said, which I could laugh about now, and she laughed with me, bless her, before putting me right. And I said, "Well, but we'll be okay because we'll go out together. We'll go out together, so that will be okay." Um, and I know this is making me look really bad, but you wanted an honest response, didn't you? Um, um, but we'll go out together, and that'll be okay. And she said, "Oh, you fool." Of course, of course, she's a great friend of mine. You fool! Of course, it will be okay when I go out with you. It won't happen when I'm with you because you are white and you are privileged and you have no eye. Of course, it will be okay. And it was like being hit in the face with a sledgehammer, is how I would describe it.
Yeah.
And I realised, a bit like you said, Rach, that even though I thought, if you had asked me before that conversation, I would have said, "I'm inclusive, I'm not racist, I understand, I get it, I want the world to be a place where people are valued for their being, regardless of their colour and all of that." And I would have said that um, I was well informed. And of course, what I realised was, with the great sledgehammering thunk, is that I absolutely wasn't. I just wasn't. And so since then, gosh, nearly 20 years ago, isn't it? So since then, that journey, that leadership journey that you talked about previously, and for me, I feel it's an ongoing. It's a bit like self-awareness. You're never done, are you?
Yeah.
So it's an ongoing journey, and um, I've asked good questions, and I talk a lot about it in the facilitation that I do. And it's quite often people are frightened to have those conversations because they don't want to offend. And I think if you can accept that, you don't know, and that your intention is kind and I was going to say pure is maybe the wrong word, but your intention is to understand better so that you can teach yourself and that you can do things better, then most of the time, most people are happy to have that conversation with you because they recognize the intention behind it. And it's not voyeurism, it's not salacious kind of Sun headline kind of thing. It's about a genuine desire to understand other people's perspectives, because I cannot I cannot walk in their shoes because I'm not them, but I can listen to their experiences and honor them and believe them and not do that thing. It's like, oh my goodness, that can't be true, because I desperately don't want it to be true, but it is.
Yeah. And that's the sad thing, isn't it? I feel the same. I don't want it to be true, but it is true. It's the world we're living in, and we have to face that.
And also, I think by my understanding that the way that I respond potentially makes it more true if I don't continue that journey. So to just keep saying, there's another story of a friend of mine who has a I think he's Kenyan of origin, Kenyan son, and she said, I'm dreading having the conversation with him that when he's 11-ish, as a teenager, I'm going to have the conversation about hoodies and how and she said it's a different conversation than I have with my other two children who are white. And she said, and it infuriates me that I have to have that, but I would be not being fair to him if I didn't have that conversation. So I think there are so many conversations that we need to have, heartbreaking though it is, but the more we have them and the more that we face into our own perspectives and help them to grow into a more inclusive and safe space, then we're doing the good that you talked about at the top of the show.
Yeah, indeed. And it brings us all round into the notion of allyship, doesn't it, really? Yeah. This is what we're talking about. We've got to recognise that we are having this conversation as three white voices. And so, we are inevitably incredibly limited in the depths of our understanding of a whole load of things. But as allies, we can help to share what we do know, and we can continually do the work to learn more, understand more, and be part of that collective creating a better world, better society, better understanding, all of the things. We get to do that as allies together.
Yeah, absolutely. That gets my vote every day of the week and twice on Sunday. No brainer.
Thank you so much. That was every bit the inspiring and brilliant conversation that I thought I had anticipated as having G. So thank you so much for being our guest today. And we really appreciate you being here. Would you like to share with people how they can get in touch with you, where they can find you in any one of your spaces, before we just finish off?
Absolutely. Well, I'm very easy to find. I am G Sabini-Roberts, all one word. You can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and TikTok under that. So come find me wherever you hang out. It will be lovely to get to know all of you.
Thank you. It's been such a joy, and I have had the honour and the privilege of chatting and being in real life with G, and it's absolutely worth looking her up and having conversations and being in her world. So thank you. Sorry, did I? I apologise. That's so rude. I apologise profusely. They, you, them. Absolutely. You see, and this is live. We're not going to edit that. because it shows you how easy it is to do.
It is indeed. And you did that beautifully. Acknowledge and move on. Perfect.
Exactly. So thank you for being here today. We will be back in 2 weeks' time with the next episode of The Renny Show.
Yep, our next episode will be on the 20th of November, which will be myself and Jenny. And then 2 weeks after that, we've got another very exciting guest lined up. So watch this space, because we will be making an announcement as to who that's going to be. So, G, thank you so much, as Jenny said, for giving up your time to be with us. We appreciate it enormously. And it's been such an engaging conversation. I really hope you've enjoyed your time with us. And for those that are listening, please, let's carry on these conversations, because it's really important that they keep happening. So feel free to join in and let us know what you all think. So, G, thank you once again for being with us. Thank you, Jenny. A pleasure as always. And we will see you all again in 2 weeks. Ta-ta for now.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Take care. Until next time, be inspiring and be brilliant.